80,000 soldiers. Every single one of them needs to eat today. Not tomorrow. Not when supplies arrive. Today. Right now. In the middle of hostile territory. With no trucks. No trans. No refrigeration. No supply chain software. No GPS to track where anything is. Just men. Animals. Roads. And a system so precisely engineered that it fed, armed, and moved the largest professional army the ancient world had ever seen, across 3 continents, for 500 years without missing a single scheduled campaign. How? That question has fascinated military historians for centuries. Because the Roman logistics system did not just work. It worked consistently, at scale, under conditions that would collapse most modern supply operations. It worked when roads were bad and weather was worse. It worked in the deserts of North Africa and the forests of Germania and the mountains of Spain. It worked when the enemy was actively trying to disrupt it. And it worked not because Rome had technology we don't have. It worked because Rome had something rarer and harder to build than technology. It had a system, a complete, interlocking, ruthlessly optimized system that turned the problem of feeding and moving 80,000 people into something as predictable and manageable as a mathematical calculation. This is the story of that system, and it will change how you think about what it actually takes to build something that works at scale. Before the first soldier took the first step of a campaign, the Roman logistics system had already been running for months. This is the first thing most people get wrong about Roman military power. They think of the legions as a reactive force. A threat emerges, Rome responds, the army marches. The reality was the opposite. Roman campaign logistics operated on a planning horizon that was so far in advance of the actual military operation that by the time soldiers were moving, most of the hard work was already done. The planning began with a specific officer whose title was quaestor. Every Roman army had one. The quaestor was responsible for supply, grain, equipment, replacement weapons, medical supplies, the 1,000 categories of material that a functioning army required. He was not a combat officer. He was an administrator, a logistician, a man whose entire professional competence was organized around the question, what does this army need, and how do we ensure it is there when it is needed? The quaestor's first task, months before a campaign, was calculation. Specifically, how much does this army eat in a day? The answer, for a Roman legion of approximately 5,000 men, was roughly 52 tons of grain per month. That is the grain alone, the base caloric provision that kept soldiers functional. Add in the food for the cavalry horses and the pack animals, the fodder requirements, the supplementary provisions that kept the army from developing the nutritional deficiencies that made soldiers sick and unreliable, and the monthly total for a full army of 80,000 men reached numbers that require a moment to absorb. Approximately 800 tons of grain per month, per food, plus everything else. This is not a number that can be improvised. It cannot be foraged. It cannot be bought at local markets when you arrive somewhere and hope the local economy has 800 tons of surplus grain waiting for you. It has to be prepositioned, calculated, purchased, or requisitioned months in advance, transported to storage depots along the campaign route, and made available at specific points in specific quantities according to a schedule that the campaign plan has established with precision. The quaestor built this schedule, on paper, in advance, before anyone moved. The storage network that made this prepositioning possible was one of Rome's most significant and least celebrated infrastructure investments. The Romans called their supply depots horia. The word simply means granaries or storehouses, but the horia of the Roman military were not improvised. They were permanent, stone-built, architecturally sophisticated structures positioned at strategic intervals along the road network, calculated to support military operations in their region. The largest horia were enormous. The great supply base at Corbridge in northern Britain, supporting operations along Hadrian's Wall, covered several acres and could store thousands of tons of grain. The horia at Novisium on the Rhine, supporting the German frontier legions, was designed with raised floors that circulated air beneath the grain to prevent moisture damage, with thick walls that regulated temperature, with drainage systems that kept water away from stored supplies. These are not primitive stockpiles. They were precision storage systems, designed by engineers who understood the specific problems of long-term food storage: moisture, temperature, rodents, spoilage, and built physical solutions for each. The distribution network connected the Horia to the army through a system of regular supply convoys. Not ad hoc, not improvised when supplies ran low. Scheduled, predictable, as reliable as Rome's road network could make them, which was very reliable indeed. The road network. This is the piece of Roman logistics that everyone has heard of and almost no one has fully understood. Rome built over 50,000 miles of roads across the empire. Paved roads, with foundations, with drainage, with surfaces cambered to shed water, with milestones every Roman mile, approximately 1.5 kilometers, marked with the distance to the nearest town. These are not impressive numbers in the modern context. 50,000 miles is a fraction of the road network of any modern developed country. But the modern road network exists in a world with bulldozers and asphalt and engineering machinery of extraordinary power. The Roman road network was built by human hands, with hand tools, over centuries. And more importantly, the Roman road network was not primarily a commercial or civilian investment. It was a military logistics infrastructure designed specifically to solve the problem of moving large quantities of material over large distances at predictable speeds. The key word is predictable. A Roman army marching on a Roman road covered approximately 20 Roman miles per day. That is roughly 30 kilometers. This was not the army's maximum speed. A forced march could cover significantly more. It was the standard operational pace, the pace at which the army could march indefinitely without accumulating fatigue that degraded combat capability. 20 miles per day, consistently, day after day. If you know the pace and you know the route, you can calculate with precision where the army will be on any given day. And if you know where the army will be, you can ensure that supplies are there waiting for it. Not approximately there. There, at the right depot, in the right quantity, on the right day. The road turned logistics from a problem of adaptation into a problem of calculation. And Rome was extraordinarily good at calculation. The roads also served a second logistics function that is less obvious but equally important. They enabled the rapid movement of information. A system of posting stations, mansions, positioned at regular intervals along the road network provided fresh horses for official messengers, accommodation for traveling officials, and relay points for the information that made coordinated logistics possible. A messenger carrying urgent information on the Roman road network could cover approximately 50 miles per day using the relay station system. This meant that a questor's report on supply shortfalls, a commander's request for additional provisions, or a warning about a disrupted convoy could travel from the frontier to Rome and back with instructions in a matter of days. 50,000 miles of road. Relay stations every 15 miles. Fresh horses available throughout. A communication system that, for the ancient world, was extraordinary. Without the road network, the logistics calculation breaks down. You cannot schedule supply convoys if you cannot predict travel times. You cannot preposition supplies if you cannot reliably move them. The road was not an accessory to Roman logistics. It was a foundation on which everything else stood. Now let us talk about the mule. The Roman army's relationship with the mule was one of the most important and least romantic stories in military history. The mule, not the horse, not the ox, but specifically the mule, was the animal that made Roman logistics possible at the scale and pace the army required. Mules are neither dramatic nor glamorous. They do not charge into battle. They do not inspire poetry. But a Roman army without its mules was an army that could not move effectively, because the mule was the primary transport animal for the equipment and supplies that kept the army functional. The Romans chose mules over horses for supply work for specific and well-reasoned practical reasons. Mules eat less than horses of equivalent size. They are more disease-resistant. They can carry heavier loads relative to their body weight. They are significantly more sure-footed on rough terrain. which matters enormously when you are moving supply convoys over road surfaces that, however well engineered, were not perfectly smooth. And they live longer, meaning the investment in a supply mule paid returns over a longer operational period than a comparable horse. The Romans calculated the mule requirement for a campaign the same way they calculated the grain requirement. Precisely, in advance. A standard mule could carry approximately 300 Roman pounds, roughly 100 kilograms, of supplies over the daily march distance. If you know how much material the army needs to move, and you know what each mule can carry, you can calculate exactly how many mules you need. You can calculate the fodder requirements of those mules. You can calculate the men required to manage them. You can build all of this into the logistics plan before the campaign begins. The optio, a junior officer in each century, was responsible for equipment inventory, including pack animal loads. He knew exactly what was on each mule in his section's train. He knew the weight. He knew the destination. He knew what needed to arrive first and what could wait. This inventory management, systematic, documented, distributed across the command structure, was what turned a collection of loaded animals into a functioning supply chain. Every Roman soldier was also a logistics asset. This is the insight that distinguished Roman supply management from every other ancient army's approach, and that is still recognizable in modern military logistics doctrine. Gaius Marius, the great military reformer of the late 2nd century BC, made a change to Roman army organization that looks, on the surface, like a minor adjustment to equipment policy. He required every soldier to carry his own personal supplies and equipment rather than relying on the army's baggage train for everything. The standard load that a Marian legionary carried was approximately 40 kilograms. That included his armor, the Larica Hamada chainmail shirt weighing around 10 kilograms, his helmet, his weapons, his tools, the entrenching equipment that built the camp every night, the stakes for the camp perimeter. His personal provisions, 3 days of grain, hardtack biscuits, dried food. His cooking equipment, his bedroll, 40 kilograms. On his back, for 20 miles a day, the soldiers called themselves Muli Mariani, Marius's mules. It was not a compliment, at least not initially. The load was brutal. The physical demand was serious. Men who had joined the legion expecting to fight found themselves performing the labor of pack animals. But the logistics mathematics were compelling. Before Marius, a Roman army's baggage train was enormous. Wagons, pack animals, servants, slaves, all the infrastructure required to carry the supplies that soldiers were not carrying themselves. This train was slow, vulnerable, required feeding itself, and could be disrupted or captured by a mobile enemy. After Marius, the soldier was the supply chain. His 3 days of provisions moved with him, at his pace, across every terrain the army covered. The baggage train still existed. You could not eliminate it entirely, but it was dramatically smaller and, therefore, faster, less vulnerable, and less logistically demanding. The trade was clear and deliberate. Additional physical burden on the individual soldier in exchange for a lighter, faster, more resilient logistics system overall. Rome made that trade, consistently, across 5 centuries of military operations. Now let's talk about what this actually felt like, because the numbers and the systems can make it sound efficient and clean. It was not. You were a legionary on campaign. Your first morning of March. You wake before dawn. The camp, which you helped build last night, spending 3 hours digging ditches and hammering stakes after a 20-mile march, is already stirring. The century's optio is moving through the tent lines, and his presence means one thing. Time to pack. You roll your blanket. You pack your cooking pot into its cloth wrapping. You pick up your grain sack. 3 days of grain, which sounds adequate and is not, because you have been hungry every day since the campaign started, and the grain never quite fills the space the hunger occupies. You shoulder your pack, your entrenching tools, your weapons, the stakes for tonight's camp perimeter. 40 kilograms settles onto your back and shoulders with the familiar weight of something that has been there for weeks and has stopped feeling temporary. The column forms. You take your place. The order comes. You walk 20 miles in hobnailed sandals on stone roads. The hobnails grip the surface but transmit every irregularity of the road surface directly to your feet. Your feet have calluses on their calluses. The pain is not sharp anymore. It is dull, pervasive background. It has been there so long, it has become part of what walking feels like. The grain you ate this morning sits in your stomach. Pascha, the vinegar and water drink that passes for a beverage in the Roman army, and hardtack biscuits dense enough to require serious jaw work. It is filling in a way that sawdust is filling. It occupies volume. It does not satisfy. Around mile 12, the water in your canteen runs out. The next water source is wherever the officers say it is. You trust that they have planned for this because the alternative that they have not is not a thought you can afford to have while still moving forward. Mile 16. The pack is the same weight it was at mile 1. Your body is not. The specific fatigue of sustained load-bearing under sustained aerobic effort is not like the fatigue of hard but short exertion. It is cumulative. It adds to yesterday's and the day before. Your knees hurt in a specific way that you have learned is not injury, but is also not sustainable indefinitely. Your shoulders have stopped communicating meaningfully. They're numb in a way that borders on concerning. 40 kilograms settles onto your back and shoulders with the familiar weight of something that has been there for weeks and has stopped feeling temporary. The column forms. You take your place. The order comes. You walk 20 miles in hobnailed sandals on stone roads. The hobnails grip the surface but transmit every irregularity of the road surface directly to your feet. Your feet have calluses on their calluses. The pain is not sharp anymore. It is dull, pervasive background. It has been there so long, it has become part of what walking feels like. The grain you ate this morning sits in your stomach. Pascha, the vinegar and water drink that passes for a beverage in the Roman army, and hardtack biscuits dense enough to require serious jaw work. It is filling in a way that sawdust is filling. It occupies volume. It does not satisfy. Around mile 12, the water in your canteen runs out. The next water source is wherever the officers say it is. You trust that they have planned for this because the alternative that they have not is not a thought you can afford to have while still moving forward. Mile 16. The pack is the same weight it was at mile 1. Your body is not. The specific fatigue of sustained load-bearing under sustained aerobic effort is not like the fatigue of hard but short exertion. It is cumulative. It adds to yesterday's and the day before. Your knees hurt in a specific way that you have learned is not injury, but is also not sustainable indefinitely. Your shoulders have stopped communicating meaningfully. They're numb in a way that borders on concerning. To respond to threats. The logistics system that made the Roman army invincible on open ground was designed for specific conditions. Remove those conditions. Remove the roads, the prepositioned supplies, the predictable march pace, and the system did not adapt gracefully. It failed, and the army that depended on it failed with it. 18,000 soldiers dead, 3 eagles lost, the most catastrophic Roman military defeat in generations. Augustus Caesar, receiving the news, is said to have wandered the palace crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." But the legions were not lost to superior fighting. They were lost to a logistics failure, to an army that had been moved into conditions its supply system could not support. The lesson Rome drew was not to avoid forests. It was to understand, with absolute clarity, that the logistics system was not a support function for the army. It was the army. Destroy the logistics, and you destroy the fighting force. Protect it, and you protect everything. After Teutoburg, Roman military doctrine in Germania changed significantly. The emphasis on road building, always high, intensified. The requirements for advanced logistics reconnaissance became more stringent. The rules about what terrain a Roman army could acceptably operate in were revised in light of what happened when those rules were ignored. The system learned from failure, because it was a system, not a collection of individual decisions. It could be revised, improved, and applied consistently across every Roman commander in every Roman theater. That institutional learning capacity, the ability to identify failures, understand their causes, revise doctrine, and implement the revision consistently, was perhaps the most important feature of the Roman logistics system. more important than any specific technical innovation, more important than the roads or the mules or the supply depots. An army that learns is an army that gets better. Rome was an army that had been learning for 500 years. Compare Roman logistics to the armies that preceded and followed it. Alexander the Great's army was logistically sophisticated by the standards of its era. Alexander kept his baggage train deliberately lean and moved with speed that other ancient armies could not match. He was ahead of his time in understanding that logistics was a strategic variable, not just a support function. But Alexander's system was built around Alexander. It required his personal decisions, his personal energy, his personal understanding of what his army needed. When Alexander died, the system that had sustained his campaigns died with him. His successors, the Diadochi who divided his empire, were capable men who included capable generals. None of them could replicate the logistical performance of Alexander's campaigns because the system had never been institutionalized. It existed in one man's head. The Roman system did not exist in anyone's head. It existed in doctrine, in procedure, in the trained competence of quaestors and options and road surveyors and supply depot managers across the entire empire. It was reproducible, transferable. The quaestor of the Rhine frontier legions was applying the same principles as the quaestor of the Syrian legions, because both had been trained within the same institutional framework. Medieval European armies, which inherited the territory that Rome had administered, but not the institutional knowledge that had made Roman logistics possible, struggled with exactly this problem for centuries. The armies that fought the Crusades were larger, in some cases, than the forces Rome had fielded. They had more motivated soldiers. They had the religious conviction that their cause was just. They starved. They got sick from contaminated water. They ran out of arrows or iron or leather and simply stopped being able to fight. Their campaigns failed repeatedly, not from lack of courage, but from logistical collapse. What they were missing was not technology. The technology available to a medieval European army was, in many respects, comparable to what Rome had used. What they were missing was the system, the institutional knowledge. The trained professional class of logisticians who knew how to calculate requirements, pre-position supplies, maintain the road network, and manage the thousand details that turned an army from a crowd into a functioning military force. Rome had spent 500 years building that institutional knowledge. It had been lost in the collapse of the Western Empire, and its absence was felt in every failed medieval campaign. In every army that marched confidently into territory it could not feed itself in. In every general who discovered too late that courage and numbers and divine favor were insufficient substitutes for grain and roads and mules. So here is what Roman logistics actually was. Not roads and mules and grain depots. Those were the physical components. The system was something else. It was the disciplined application of calculation to the problem of human physical survival at scale. It was the institutionalization of knowledge that would otherwise exist only in individual experts. It was the transformation of ad hoc improvisation into predictable procedure, the replacement of hope with planning. Every element of the Roman logistics system was designed to answer a specific question before that question became a crisis. How much does the army eat? Calculate it in advance. Where will the army be next week? Calculate it from the march rate. What supplies will it need at that location? Calculate it from the army's composition. Are those supplies available? Ensure they are, months before they are needed. The Roman logistics system was not impressive because it involved extraordinary technology or unprecedented physical capability. It was impressive because it was mundane, because it took the catastrophic, army-destroying problems that logistics failures created in every other ancient military force and reduced them to administrative routine. The genius was not the road or the mule or the supply depot. The genius was the spreadsheet, the calculation, the understanding that the most dangerous threat to a Roman army was not an enemy general or an impregnable fortress. It was an empty grain sack. And empty grain sacks were a planning problem, not a fate. Here is the question Roman logistics leaves you with, and it applies to every complex undertaking in the modern world. Think about the projects, the organizations, the systems you are part of. The ones that work consistently and the ones that don't. The ones that seem to handle disruption gracefully and the ones that collapse when conditions change. The difference is almost never capability, almost never talent, almost never resources at the fundamental level. It is almost always whether the system has been thought through before the crisis arrives, whether the calculation has been done in advance, whether the planning horizon extends far enough that the army does not arrive at the supply depot to find it empty. Rome did not build the greatest logistics system the ancient world produced because Roman soldiers were stronger or Roman engineers were smarter. They built it because they asked the right question: what does this system need to function? And then answered it systematically, institutionally, and far enough in advance that the answer was ready before it was late. The mule is unglamorous. The grain depot is invisible. The quester's calculations never appear in heroic poetry. But the general who gets the credit for the victory is standing on the foundation that the mule and the grain depot and the quester built. Rome knew which one was indispensable. Do you? In the next video, we go inside the Roman medical system. Because the same civilization that calculated grain requirements to the nearest modius also developed battlefield triage, field surgery protocols, and quarantine procedures that kept Roman soldiers alive at rates that no other ancient army could match. The Roman army had a better survival rate from battlefield wounds than any other force in the ancient world. Not because Romans were harder, because Rome had decided, systematically and institutionally, that keeping soldiers alive was a logistics problem. And logistics problems have solutions. That video is coming. And if the supply system surprised you, the medical system will genuinely astonish you.